Thank you very much, first of all, everyone, for joining this Study in Canada info session this morning. I'm sure everyone is looking forward to it, but hopefully you are also looking forward to attend this session because there is a lot of new and important information that we would like to share through this session. So thank you so much again for joining. For those of you that have not known me or met me, my name is Welly Custono. I'm the Director of Canadian Education International Indonesia. We are a not-for-profit foundation mandated by the Embassy of Canada to promote Canadian education in Indonesia. So this session is one of the annual events that we organize every year, and basically to give a session to refresh everyone's memory, at the same time updating you with any new information that may be relevant to you as education stakeholders, the local schools, and as well as the local agents in Indonesia. So thank you very much for all representatives for joining me this morning. So let's begin my presentation this morning by giving you an update about where Canada stands as one of the top destinations for overseas study in the world. Now, most of the information that I will be sharing in my slides today are all very current, or I try to update all the facts and the numbers to the latest figure as much as possible. So as per the end of last year, 2023, there were currently more than 1 million. To be more precise, there were 1,040,985 international students currently studying in Canada at all levels of education. And looking at this figure, there's been a fantastic growth of international students in Canada for the past decade. In fact, the increase was approximately 200%. And if you are looking only at the year-on-year figure, so from 2022 to 2023, then you will be able to see that even the increase is quite significant as well, which is close to 30%. Based on some articles that I've read, even if you are looking at the other major overseas study destinations, the other big four destinations, most of them perform at about 10% increase compared to their previous year. But for Canada, it's nearly tripled the number. So this is definitely something very good and shows interest, prospect of Canada as an overseas study destination among international students worldwide. In fact, based on this latest figure, Canada is probably one of the fastest growing popular overseas destination in the world. And it's definitely in the second most popular destination. When we are looking at the big four destinations, Canada is number 2 out of those 4 countries. But this is not something that's happening only globally, but we also observe this among Indonesian students as well. In fact, if we are looking at the popular overseas study destinations among Indonesian students, we also see that Canada is in the top 10. If we are looking specifically at overseas study destinations that use English as a language of instruction, then you will see that Canada is even in the top 5 among Indonesian students. So we do see similar trends happening globally and in Indonesia with respect to Canada as an overseas study destination. But of course, in terms of the number of Indonesian students going to Canada, I must admit the number is still relatively small. And I'll be sharing some of those numbers if we are to compare them with the other top 5 destinations. Now, one of the unique thing about Canada or students, international students going to Canada, is that approximately 75% of all those 1 million students in Canada generally are post-secondary students. So high school students looking to continue their education, either to study diploma or maybe associate degree or even bachelor degree. Now, as of this point, majority of the international students do go to bigger provinces like Ontario and British Columbia. So approximately 52% international students, they study in Ontario, around 20% study in British Columbia. But we also see the trend of moving to the smaller provinces like Quebec, around 11%, Alberta, 6%, and then the other provinces like Manitoba, Nova Scotia, and so on. So we also see the trend of going to this different provinces, which also offer very good quality of education, because one of the unique things about education system in Canada is that majority of the Canadian education institutions are public institutions, and they are very good quality, and therefore international students are able to locate good institutions offering good quality programs at more affordable price when they open their scope of search to these other provinces as well, rather than just focusing on the first two provinces like Ontario and British Columbia. Now, in terms of top fields of study for international students, I must admit that STEM is a major draw for Canada. So anything related to science, technology, engineering, and math are very popular. But of course, other programs like business and other natural and social sciences are also quite popular. I do have some slides focusing on some of these programs that I will be sharing soon. So these are probably some of the numbers that you may not have seen before. And so I like to take this opportunity to show you the degree of interest of Indonesian students going to Canada in the last 10 years or even more. So this first graph that I want to share with you are study permit holders from Indonesia in which year the permit became effective. So in other words, when looking at this number, we can see approximately the number of Indonesian students that go to Canada and begin their study for the first time with respect to every year. So you see, starting from 2015 all the way to 2023, we have seen a consistent increase of Indonesian students going to Canada every year, with the exception of 2020, and I'm sure everyone knows what happened then because of COVID. But with the exception of that year, the interest of Indonesian students going to Canada remained consistently positive and growing. The latest figure in 2023, there were approximately 1,700 plus Indonesian students going to Canada and begin their study. Now, if you are looking at the next slide, this is the number of study permit holders from Indonesia at the end of every year. So this is an accumulated figure, right? This is the total number of Indonesian students. So you can interpret this data as being the total number of Indonesian students currently or were studying in Canada at that period of time. So when we look back at the last 20 years, you can see that the trend remains consistent, where the growth of Indonesian students studying in Canada also continue to increase at a steady rate, with the exception of 2020. But as you can see, the growth is sharper, especially post-COVID, where the number continued to increase at a faster pace. And last year, 2023, we actually broke the 3,000 figure. So there were more than 3,000 Indonesian students studied in Canada at the end of year 2023. So this is consistent with what's happening globally. But of course, globally, the number of international students studying in Canada grew at a much faster rate, as I've already explained in the beginning. So this rapid increase of the number of international students arriving in Canada, no doubt, have begun to put pressure on several things like housing, healthcare, and other services. And this is actually the context or the background of what's happening in Canada, and one of the main reasons that results in the announcement of some of the new IRCC policy earlier this year. Of course, the objective is to ensure sustainable growth. And that's why there were measures introduced with the main objective to stabilize the number of international students in Canada. So if you have received mixed messages or misinformation about Canada closing the door, Canada no longer accepts international students, I can assure you that those information is false, is misinformation, and it's definitely hoax. So Canada remains open, and we are still one of the most popular destination that welcome international students to the country. But we do need to stabilize the rate of growth of these international students coming to Canada. And that's why earlier this year, these are some of the announcements made by our CC. I will be going through them a bit quickly because I assume most of you have heard about this or have read about it. But just to give you an overview, the first one is the capping of the number of international student permit applications to be processed. So keep in mind that the cap is on the number of study permit application processed. Okay, and please also note that this policy is temporary. This will be introduced and implemented for the next 2 years, starting this year, 2024. So the idea is to have approximately a decrease of 35% figure from 2023. So the estimated study permit approved is around 360,000. That's the ultimate outcome. But that's, of course, based on an assumption of an approval rate of about 60% average worldwide from different countries around the world. So this cap, once again, I need to emphasize that although ultimately this is to stabilize the number of international students coming to Canada, this policy is not going to affect current study permit holders and renewals. So in other words, students that are already in Canada, and this will not be affecting those interested in master or doctoral degrees, and certainly will not be applied to elementary and secondary applicants. Okay, so in other words, this is going to focus on the biggest chunk of the profile of the international students studying in Canada, which is the post-secondary students, as I've outlined earlier in my earlier explanation. So the second policy introduced is the requirement of provincial attestation letter, or it's also known as PAL, issued by the provincial governments. And this is document required for study permit application. So if current applicants, if you don't have this provincial attestation letter, then your submission of study permit application will be returned to you. Okay, but the good news is the procedure of issuing attestation letter by respective provinces have already been announced by the latest last month. So every province now, as we speak, has already established a procedure in terms of issuing this provincial attestation letter. And I will be giving a brief explanation about how the process works in the next slide. But once again, this requirement of provincial attestation letter is not applicable to preschool students all the way to secondary, master or doctoral degree students, or current students in Canada. Now, the third policy also introduced earlier this year is the changing eligibility criteria of the post-graduation work permit and the open work permit. So first of all, a lot of people are somewhat confused with this one because there is a statement of the policy that highlights that study program offered at private colleges under curriculum licensing agreements with associated public college will no longer be eligible for PGWP. So a lot of people confused. They were thinking that if the students go to private colleges or if they are enrolled in a diploma program, that they will not be eligible for PGWP. This is incorrect because this policy are mainly focused towards students that study programs offered at private colleges, but this program is a result of a licensing agreement with a public college. Now, as far as I know, based on my observation, we do not see these colleges actively recruiting in Indonesia. So this is not meant to target all private colleges. Once again, the non-eligibility for PGWP is only for private college that has a curriculum licensing program with public college. So it's essentially a public college program, but offered at a private college. So if this is the case, then yes, the students currently taking that program and any students taking that program in the next couple of years, unless the policy change, will no longer be eligible for PGWP. But the good news is graduates of master degree programs will now be eligible for a 3-year post-graduation work permit. In the past, the PGWP only takes into account the duration of study. So if the duration of the program of study is 2 years or longer, then the PGWP can be extended up to 3 years. But anything lower than 2 years will be the duration of or the validity of the PGWP will be equal to the duration of the program of study. So most master degree programs, as we know, are usually shorter than 2 years. A lot of times they are just about 1 or 1.5 years. So this is actually at a disadvantage for those that graduate from the master degree programs. But since February 15 this year, all grads of master degree programs, regardless the length of study, will be eligible for a 3-year post-graduation work permit. Now, regarding the open work permits, which essentially applies to students that travel together with family, with their spouse and their children, usually the spouse will be looking for open work permit and the children will be looking at open study permit. This no longer applies to all levels of education. In fact, this will now only be available to spouse of international students that are enrolled in graduate programs like master and doctoral only, as well as professional degree granting programs. So in other words, what about postgraduate certificate? What about postgraduate diploma offered at polytechnics or colleges? But those can still be open for PGWP, but not 3-year PGWP, okay? Because the 3-year PGWP is only extended for master degree programs only. And similarly, the postgraduate certificate diploma and so on, or other diploma for that matter, will no longer be eligible to extend open work permits to the spouse of the students. So the open work permits will now be extended only to the spouse of students that are enrolled in the master or doctoral degrees only. So I hope this quick overview is clear for everyone. Now, with regards to the PALS, because I received a lot of questions about this. So as I've said, all provinces have now announced their systems of delivering PALS to account for the respective allocation limit. So just in case you are wondering, what is PAL, right? So the federal or the IRCC has already delegated the quota of a number of study permits that can be processed to the respective provinces. Now, because education is under the provincial ministry's jurisdiction, so it is up to the provincial government to issue or allocate the quota to their respective institutions within their province. And that's why this PALS or this provincial attestation letters is a means to monitor and account that students that receive PALS means that they are still within the allocation limit. If the allocation limit has been reached, theoretically, the provincial government will no longer be able to issue the PAL. And if they cannot issue the PAL, then obviously the student, even though they might have been accepted to a certain program, they will not be able to continue because they won't be able to proceed with their study permit application. And please keep in mind that once this provincial attestation letter is issued, it cannot be returned or it cannot be reused. So in other words, the institutions will be looking very closely as well into their applications to determine what considered to be prospective genuine students, because they want to maximize the outcome of their PAL. Because once they use the quota and issue it to a certain student, and for any reason the student will not be able to come to Canada, maybe because of various reasons, study permit reviews, or maybe maybe they were considering other destinations or so on, then that PAL will expire. It cannot be returned and cannot be reused. So you will see that Canadian institutions will also be paying close attention to the quality of applicants. And therefore, in this case, for education consultants or education agents counseling students, it is also important for you to be a part of this, to make sure that you are assisting genuine, prospective, good quality students to ensure that the outcome remains positive for the students and for the Canadian institutions as well. But the general procedure of the issuance of PAL is similar to what's been described in this diagram. So basically, when a student submits an application to a certain institution, and when these students receive a letter of admission, or sometimes we call it letter of acceptance, both are being widely known as LOA. So when a student receives an LOA, it's up to the student to accept that offer of admission as soon as possible and pay the deposit. Some institutions call it tuition deposit, some call it confirmation deposit, or maybe there are some other terminologies. But essentially, the deposit is a confirmation, is a way to confirm that the offer of admission is accepted. And in some cases, when students do that, student may also be required to submit like a PAL confirmation or request form. So the school or the institution will be sending a letter or a form that students need to complete or submit. Okay, in some cases there are variants like that, but essentially when this stage is completed, it's now up to the institution to assist the student getting the PAL from the provincial government. So the institution will inform the provincial government, and through some means, the provincial attestation letter will be issued back to the student. Some use the university portal, some use OUAC, like an Ontario University Admission Center, or some other variations. But essentially, there is no action needed after student accept the offer and pay the deposit, or even submit the PAL confirmation or request form. All they need to is monitor the email correspondence, the student portal, their email box, to make sure that once they receive a notification that a PAL has been issued to the student, that they can download the document. So now, in other words, before student can proceed with their study permit application, there are two main documents that they must have. One is the letter of admission or acceptance, LOA, from the institution, the DLI, the designated learning institution. And another one is the provincial attestation letter, the PAL, which is issued by the respective provincial government. For those students going to Quebec, in the past, Quebec has always issued a certificate that's called CAQ, Certificate of Acceptance of Quebec. So this will be considered as PAL. However, in the certificate now, there is an additional PAL line that's indicating that this CAQ is sufficient to serve as a PAL. So make sure that students going to Quebec, when they receive the CAQ, they find this PAL, this PAL line, that's what they call, in the CAQ document, to make sure that the CAQ indeed will suffice the PAL requirement before submitting the study permit. So I hope all this information are relatively new, and I've covered them, try to cover them at a slower pace. So hopefully this is clear. Now, I think most importantly, I like to address how this will affect Indonesia, right? Like this policy, how is this going to affect Indonesia in the moving forward? So number one, in bold, I like to remind everyone again, and I'm hoping that by sharing this information to all of you, which are our main education stakeholders, or our front lines to the students and the parents, that you will carry this message to beware of misinformation, because the social media in Indonesia is rampant, right? It's even faster than traditional media, but it's not always accurate. So it's very important to be mindful of the misinformation or the hoax that's out there. Try to always find out and try to research on your own to make sure that the information is accurate before even sharing it further or forwarding it to other people, so that we can avoid unnecessary panic. Fortunately, we have worked with all of you since the beginning of this year, trying to educate the public better about this new IRCC policy. So hopefully, as more information get out, students and parents will understand better and will not necessarily be panicking and making misinformed decisions. So how is this going to affect Indonesia? First of all, by looking at the stats that I've presented earlier, you notice now that international students from Indonesia, even though they have been growing for the past 10 to even 20 years, it only represents approximately 0.3% of the total current international students in Canada. So I do not believe that this policy will significantly affect policy of the international students being admitted to Canada, essentially. But this may have happened more likely from the point of view of the students and parents. If they get the wrong information or if they don't get accurate information, psychologically, they might think that Canada is no longer open for them and therefore they should be looking at other destinations. So once again, it's very important to communicate the right information. In fact, the way I see this is an opportunity to position Indonesia as a prospective source of genuine international students in the eye of Canadian institutions. Why? Because as I said, Canadian institutions are now given limited quota in terms of how they can get the PAL. So in other words, they will make sure that they can maximize their PAL quota, because if it goes out there, but it doesn't result in students actually coming to their institution, then it is their loss. Therefore, they will be looking into globally, looking at market that has potential of good prospective, genuine international students. And they also be looking at a market where the study permit approval tends to be relatively high. And I'm pleased to inform you that Indonesia, looking at the latest figure until 2021, the study permit approval rate is at 72%. So it's higher than the average 60% that I mentioned earlier. Another opportunity is to explore the high quality education institutions in other provinces. BC, Ontario, those are big provinces and they have great number of education institutions with good quality. But so do these other provinces like Alberta, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, or even other maritime provinces. And we have started to see these numbers, especially when you look back at my earlier number that I presented. We see globally, and even in Indonesia, where students start to look at these other provinces. One indicator that I can share with you, in Canada, there is something that we call Permika, or Persatuan Mahasiswa Indonesia-Canada Student Associations. These Permikas, they are now being established in many major cities in Canada, outside British Columbia and Ontario. So yes, there is in Permika Vancouver and Okanagan in British Columbia. And yes, there is Permika Toronto in Ontario. But we also have Permika Edmonton and Calgary in Alberta. We have Permika Winnipeg in Manitoba. And we also have Permika Montreal in Quebec. So we start to see these more and more Indonesian students looking at other provinces as well. And finally, it's also the opportunity to explore master degrees offered by Canadian institutions because of the possibility to now earn a 3-year post-graduation work permit despite a duration of study shorter than 2 years. Now, granted, there are not that many Canadian institutions that actively recruit international students for their master degrees, but we may be able to see this change in the future. We actually start seeing that at our last fair, where we see more and more Canadian universities now also offer their master degree program. And this are something that worth looking at as an opportunity moving forward. So usually after so many years of meeting with parents and students, counseling them about Canada, I see that these 3 factors remain the strongest pitch message. So basically, these are the 3 key messages that a lot of parents and students are attracted to, or the kind of benefits that they look at, the strengths that Canada offer for prospective international students. One is the quality of life. As I said, Canada consistently ranked very high in terms of our quality life. It's again in the top 3 based on the US News Best Countries ranking 2023. Our quality of education is also ranked in the top 4. So this is consistent with Canada being one of the big 4 destinations in the world. But most importantly, I like to highlight this work opportunity that's available to international students. And I'm not necessarily talking about the part-time job that's available to international students. Yes, international students are able to work unlimited hours on campus, 20 hours a week, recommended off campus. But I'm talking about the work integrated learning programs, which is known one of the form as co-op. So Canada offers the largest co-op program in the world. And interestingly enough, Canada is also ranked 2nd for a country to start a career after finishing study. And I believe this has something to do with the work integrated learning program that's available to international students as part of their program of study. So I'll be highlighting the co-op a little bit more. Now, because of time, I will not be covering about Canadian diversity and inclusivity. I'm sure everyone is familiar of this by now, that Canada is one of the most multicultural country in the world and also one of the most welcoming. But I also want to highlight that Canada ranks 2nd for our racial equality, and our discrimination index is actually the 2nd best in the world. So that's definitely something good to know, especially for parents that will be sending their children quite far away to Canada, especially if they're from Indonesia. Now, in terms of quality of education, rather than spending time talking about ranking, which most of you are aware already, I want to highlight the element of research and development that Canada offers. Canada as a country is responsible for nearly 3% of scientific research worldwide. And that's quite significant considering our population is only 0.5% of the world's population. So in other words, Canada punched way above our belt. Our population has contribution 5 or 6 times more than our population in terms of our R&D contribution to the world. But most importantly, if you look at this diagram, you'll see that even though all those countries are quite well known for their research, Canadian research are widely performed by the colleges and universities. The ratio is nearly 40% and much higher compared to these other countries. Our PISA result also shows something consistent as well. So not only at the graduate or research level, even at such a young age, the PISA result for Canada is very high. Canada is nearly ranked it's in the top 6, but Canada is one of the 15 countries in that list where their students' average for mathematics, readings, and science, all of them are above OECD average. So the ones in blue are the ones that are above OECD average. And as you can see, there's only a handful of countries that have higher than average for all 3 categories. And Canada is one of them. And we are one of the Western countries at the top. Now, in terms of Canadian institutions, I will be very quickly going through this because I'm sure all of you are familiar of the different forms of institutions. There is university that offer the bachelor degree. Please be mindful that most of our bachelor degrees are a 4-year degree, but we do not require foundation or diploma. So student can go straight to year 1 as a freshman, regardless their prior education, whether they are from a national curriculum or they are from an international curriculum like IB or Cambridge. Okay, our master is usually about 1 or 2 year long, PhD 3 to 5, and our college program, as you can see, focus more on shorter program that relates more to practical learning, hands-on. So like 1-year certificate, 2-year diploma, 3-year advanced diploma, 2-year associate degree, and even a 4-year degree. So this is something to pay attention to. So when we are looking at a 4-year degree, Canada actually has 2 different institutions that can be considered, either to university, which most of you are probably know, but also these 4-year degrees are also offered at polytechnic or college level. So it's worth to look at as well. Of course, college is also known for university transfer, but unlike the ones in US, as you can see here, our college tend to focus on standalone programs. So not all of them are geared towards pathway to university. We have some that are not degree like certificate diploma, but we also have some that are degree like associate and bachelor. Okay. Now, in terms of the programs of study that are popular among international students, as mentioned earlier in my introduction, these are some of the examples. I will be going through them very quickly. Business, engineering, like energy, ICT, information communication technology, and also new green energy are also popular. Life science, biotechnology, and in fact, it's not only biotechnology. We have so many different variations of biological science in Canada, like biophysics, biochem, bioinformatics, and so on. So there are quite a few different variations, especially in life sciences and health sciences. But these are generally a quick summary of highly sought degrees in Canada by international students. Please pay attention to those that I put in bold. So areas like actuarial science, artificial intelligence, computer science, data analytics, digital media, environmental science, hospitality, and so on. But I want to take the remaining time to focus on this part. Just to explain, I've taken the time to talk about PGWP, so I rather talk now about what is co-op. So essentially, first you need to know that there are a lot of partnerships going on between the private sector and the academic sector. In fact, those two are the ones that are responsible mainly for the R&D development in Canada. So some of these companies and education institutions, they also collaborate to programs like co-op and internships to allow students to get exposure early into the work integrated learning program. Our economy is also known as one of the top entrepreneurship economy in the world. And most of them are related to technology and research, as you can see in the slides. So the way the co-op works, students can begin as early as in the second year to dedicate one work term, at least one work term, which is about 4 months long, where they will not be going to school, but they will be working full-time at a company, at an establishment that's related to their study. So this is not just a mere working part-time at Starbucks, McDonald's, or convenience store, or a retail outlet, or so on. This is an actual work term that's related to their study. That's why it's called Work Integrated Learning Program. So students enrolled in a co-op program, they can do this multiple terms as early as second year, and then every year from then. So by the time the students graduate, not only that they can graduate with their degree, but at the same time, they will already have minimum at least 1 year full-time experience related to their study, something that they can highlight in their CV. And we all know how valuable that is for students to ensure that they are competitive in the job market. And one of the attribute is the work experience that they have generated. So when most countries, students start looking for work experience when they have graduated, in Canada, upon graduation, if these students do co-op, they can earn at least 1 year full-time of experience. So I don't have time to speak in more details about co-op. So I rather have these students to show how effective the co-op program can be if our students decide to enroll in them. So students like Anthony Tengoro, who is now working at Facebook, look at the type of experience and the range of experience that he had over the co-op years during his study, not after he graduated, but during his study. Same thing with Evan Goldwyn Vijaya, manager business consulting in financial service risk management at Ernst & Young. The same with Nico Alimin, software engineer 2 at Microsoft. And I purposely picked young people to show you so that you know that these are current information. We are not talking about something that happened 10, 20, 30 years ago. We are looking at younger generation that are now work successfully in Canada because they enrolled in this co-op program. And of course, they are studying hard, of course. So Christina Melissa, software engineer at Google. Michael Anglo, software engineer at Google. Michael Anglo started with an associate degree from a college first before transferring to university. And it's at the university that he began to earn his co-op experience. Navi Nata, area manager, Amazon. Cheryl Emanuela, senior consultant at Deloitte. Abraham Warisal, senior energy consultant for City of Toronto. So it's not only the private sector. In fact, co-op is also open to work with the governments. And it's also available in not necessarily always STEM, but also in other areas as well, like visual arts, product design, and so on. Thank you so much. Again, to the local school representatives and also local education consultants. Thank you for your support in the promotion of Canadian education to the students here in Indonesia. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Thank you very much. Have a great day.